Hey guys, so in this video we are going to take a look at how you can create your own custom post-processing effects in URP. If you would have seen my previous videos on the channel, we had created a lot of post-processing effects using the built-in render pipeline. So if you want to use those, you can check out the channel and I'll add the link somewhere in the video. But if you want to create your own effects, you want to take those effects from built-in render pipeline to URP, we will see how that can be done. Just to see what I am doing here today is basically I have created a post process effect, and once I switch it on, I can control this using a post process setting, and you can see that this is changing the hue for the whole scene, or it's adding an effect after the whole rendering is done. So how we can do that is basically what we are going to take a look at in this video. So now that we are working in the universal render pipeline, and this is a rendering pipeline that Unity has given to us, so we need to understand how we can, hook into the events that are provided by Unity, and from where we can get the input and how we can manipulate that or perform some calculations on that and uh, push it back. So from the previous videos, if you remember, what we were doing is after the camera renders, we were taking that image and we were blending it with an image effect shader, right? So here we are going to apply similar concepts, but in a different way, the way that Unity has implemented for the rendering pipelines. So we need to understand a couple of things here. First of all, your forward renderer or the renderer that you have implemented has options to add renderer features. So how Unity expects us to add or hook into the rendering events is using renderer features. And renderer features basically are an interface that is provided to us as users, and they take the responsibility of taking the data from the users that, which rendering event should we hook into. So for example, we have all these rendering events, and then we will take the render texture from or the data from this event. Like, okay, we are going to render a pass here, and that will be a custom pass, and then we will perform whatever calculations or whatever uh, post processing we want to do. So when we want to create a post process effect, right, we have these render events available, and we need to make sure that if it is going to be after rendering all the post processing or after everything is done, then we need to use this after rendering post processing render event. Okay, so now let's take a quick look at the render features and the render passes. Okay, so you can find this on the repository on GitHub. I'll share the link of that as well with you. Now let's see the render feature. So render feature is basically derived from the scriptable renderer feature right here. And in this, we have exposed a couple of things. Like if you see all these things, our properties are exposed to the user so that the user can set these things using the Unity's interface when the renderer feature is added. So when we create a renderer feature, we can go to the settings, click on the forward renderer, and we can add a render feature called HUE render feature. So once you add a HUE render feature, this render feature will be added. You can add a name to it. And then what we need to do is we need to provide a render pass event. Now, what is a render pass event? It means that the render pass that you write to perform certain calculations will be enqueued at this event. So when this event occurs, all your render passes will be enqueued one after the other. If you have multiple passes, right now we have single pass. So let's take a look at the render pass after this scriptable feature, render feature. So we have a render event when we want to enqueue the pass. Then we are taking a render material. So this is the same material that we are going to use or use to basically blend the source render texture, and it will give us the final render texture after applying the hue changes. Now, the second thing is the HUE settings. The HUE settings is nothing but just a scriptable object that I have created, because what happens is when you create a renderer feature, the renderer key feature is created once, and then the render passes are created once or added once. But if you want to pass on certain values which are continuously changing based on the user or based on certain events, then you need to have a method to pass on those things per frame or whenever the event occurs. So this just has the U value. So if you go back to Unity and go to the settings, forward renderer, switch on the U, you can see this post process U settings. I can actually tweak it here. All right. So, yep. This is why I have created a custom scriptable object. If you don't create a scriptable object and just pass on a value directly to this, it will not update because this only runs once. The creation of the renderer feature is only done once. All right. So the second thing, or the third thing is the render pass in itself. So I have created a HUE render pass, and we will talk about that after we go through all these functions. So the scriptable renderer feature has a create function that we are going to override, because we are going to initialize a HUE render pass right here whenever we add a new HUE render feature. And after that, we are also going to override the add render passes, right? And this basically has a renderer and rendering data. So a HUE render pass has a custom method called setup, and we will talk about that when we see the pass itself. And if you see, it has an event like when the pass should get executed, and this is the same event that is right here. And then we say renderer.enqueue pass, in which we say that we have to enqueue this pass. So let's take a look at the pass itself. Now the HUE render pass, which is going to run every frame, or it's going to be executed every frame, is derived from the scriptable render pass. So we are creating a temporary texture handle so that we can copy the current render texture into that. And then if you see, all these properties are private because we are taking this as an input. So we have a material that we're going to use to build the render textures. Then we have the source and the destination. And then we have the HUE settings. So if you see, we have passed on the HUE settings from here to here. So when you create or when you initialize the HUE render pass, what you do is you just initialize the render texture, the temporary render target handle, because we're going to associate this with the render texture. Now, this is the setup method that we are talking about. This is a custom method, and it's not overridden. You can see here, and it is called right here. Once the HUE render pass is created and the temporary texture handle is initialized, we call the setup. So now if you see here, in the setup, we have a source, we have a material, and we have the settings. Now this source is basically the camera's color target, or whatever the camera's color or rendered output is, that is the source for us. And we fetch it from the renderers. You go to renderer, camera color target. All right. Now this is the execute method that we have overridden, which has a scriptable render context and the rendering data. So if you see here, we are continuously updating the materials HUE property with the HUE settings HUE value. So if you go to Unity and you were supposed to check this, this is the HUE value, and we are continuously updating it. All right. So whatever happens now is done using a command buffer, right? And we create a command buffer and basically fetch one from the pool saying by the name of HUE render pass, and we get the temporary render texture. So if you see, you get the temporary render texture into this temp hue texture, right? And this is a texture descriptor. So basically, you can go and read about this on the documentation, but you need a texture descriptor. And because we already have a texture descriptor from the camera data through the rendering data, we can use the same. Okay. Then forget this for the moment. It's very simple. What we have to do is we just have to blit the source. If you remember, the source was uh, the camera's color target right here, and we need to blit it to the temporary render texture using this material, because this material has a shader that performs calculation to change the hue, and then we blit the same temporary texture back to source. Now if you see, all this is being done using the command buffer that we created right here. So once we say that, okay, blit this to temporary texture using the material, so the calculation happens per pixel on the image, just like we used to do in the previous videos, and then we blit it back to the source, because this is going to be the source. So the source here copied to temporary texture, then the temporary texture copied back to the source, means yeah, we are going to provide the same render texture back. And then we say context that execute command buffer. Which command buffer do you want to execute? Is the CM that we created, and then release. So that is quite it, and it's a very straightforward and simple process. Right now I am using Unity 2020.3.27, and it has a bug. Because of that bug, what happens is it does not take the correct render texture. I think this has been fixed in 2021 and above, 2021.2. If you have the same Unity version, what you can do is you need to create two render textures, like source and destination. All right. And you need to get the render target identifier as after post process texture if your render pass event is after rendering or after rendering post processing. So if you go here to the settings for render, if you're rendering after rendering or after rendering post processing, then you need to manually give this, set up the source and destination. So now if you see, we are blitting the source to the temporary render texture using the material, and then you're blitting the temporary render texture to the destination. So that is just a thing because it was a bug, so we had to introduce this these lines. Now the next thing that we need to look at is how to add this. So to add this, what we have to do is you just have to create a HUE rendered feature, and then you give it a name, then you add an event, and then you provide a material. So if you see, this material has a couple of properties like the hue and the main texture. And if I open the shader is done using the shader graph. That is it. So this is just the shader. So I'm going to maximize this. That's the shader. So you have a hue property, and if you go to the graph setting, node settings, this is the reference underscore hue, and you have the main texture, and the reference is underscore main text. Now you have to understand that this main text is very important right here, because Unity will use this as a keyword to transfer or blit the texture. So you, as you just sample a 2D texture and apply hue node, make sure that this is normalized, so it goes from 0 to 1, and then you put the hue node right in as an offset and provide it back to the base color. So if you see right here in the game window, I have the material, and I'm not able to change this. Why am I not able to change this? Is because this is already being managed by this. So 0 will give me this value, which is the original texture, and 1 will give me a whole 360 rotation of the hue. So you can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And either 1 or 0. So that is it for this video, and thank you so much for watching.